wanted to thank you for joining us for TMCC's annual U.S. Constitution Day Forum. I'm Fred Locken, Chair of the Department of History, Political Science, and Business, and want to welcome you to this adventurous conversation we're going to have this morning. I also want to thank the panelists that are joining us. We will introduce them very soon. Want to recognize that we have had an annual U.S. Constitution Day Forum for the past more than decade. It's required by federal law, and I've often made the comment, I wonder why we weren't doing this, why we needed federal law to make this happen. But tomorrow, September 17th, will be the 233rd birthday of our Constitution, and this opportunity has been created so that we once a year reflect on our Constitution, to look at its history, its interaction and development in our society, and in 2020, discussing its relevance. After 233 years, is this still the document we should be operating under for government? There are rules to today's gathering. This is going to be somewhat of a debate, so we're pretty excited by that. The format's going to be pretty straightforward. We are going to begin with opening remarks from each of the two teams. We have two teams of 3 panelists each. We will then get a reaction period to each other's opening comments. We are then going to have a brief period there where each can ask questions of the other based on what they've said to that point. Then we are going to have closing comments, and we will then be able to have some time at the end for questions. As you watch today, I would ask that if you have any questions, you put them in chat that is available down at the bottom of the screen, and you just can type in your question that you would like to be asked. As moderator, when we complete the program, I will be able to then ask any of the questions that you've had. We will not interrupt the flow of the presentation, but certainly those questions will become very important once we've completed that segment of the program. I wanted to start before we actually, I guess we could do the introductions first very briefly. On behalf of our panel, I will introduce for them. We have a sort of an in favor of the statement is the, should we scrap the Constitution and draft a new document? We have a team that is in favor of that view, and we have a team that is prepared today to argue against that view. The team in favor of that view is led by Dr. Paul Davis, our long leading and standing member of the political science program at TMCC. He has a team today that is comprised of our wonderful colleagues, both are part-time. We have Bob Morin, who is a tenured faculty member of the political science program at Western Nevada College. And then we have another colleague, Joe Dimitrovich, who has been teaching for us for part-time as well, who has a long and illustrious career with the Washoe County School District and has been teaching at TMCC for us for many, many years. On the other side, that team is led by Dr. John Reed. Dr. John Reed is, of course, a longstanding member of our history department, now the longest standing member of our history department. And John is joined this morning by 2 colleagues, Brian Fletcher, who is professor of political science here at TMCC, and another colleague, Kathy Birding, who has been a part of TMCC for many years, paralegal program, currently teaching for us in our logistics management program. And so we're happy to have both teams with us this morning. Before we start, I wanted to do a very brief poll. This is an anonymous poll, and I just want each of you, where you can on your devices, to answer the question, which is simple. At this point, do you believe we should scrap the current Constitution and draft a new one? And we're getting very quick results on this. And at this point in time, we are at 57% that feel we should keep it, and we have 33% that feel that we should write a new Constitution. Has everybody, and we in fact have a few undecided, everybody has had a chance to participate. So I thank you for doing that. We wanted to sort of see where we were before we literally get into this adventure. And just showing you where this stands then. This is where we are with yes at 32% no at 56%, and undecided at 12%. Okay. At this point, I will then indicate that we can begin this adventure, and that starts with opening statements. And the team that goes first is Dr. Davis's team. You have 8 minutes, Dr. Davis.
Okay. I'll be speaking for a couple of minutes, and then I'll move it over to my colleague, Bob Moran, and then to Joe. Today, our nation is in a death spiral. The United States is growing weaker by the day, not because of any one party or president, but rather because people across the political spectrum have lost faith in our political system and are thus looking for radical solutions. Democratic governments are only able to survive if they are seen as legitimate in the eyes of the citizens. A November 2019 Axios poll shows today, now catch this, that only 51% of Americans today have faith in democracy. Only 51%. 37% of Americans have lost faith in democracy, and 6% never have faith in democracy. A Pew Research study found that 61% of Americans now say significant changes are needed in the fundamental design and structure of the US government to make it work in current times. It is time to have a constitutional convention to draw up a new constitution. We don't need a constitution that says slaves are worth 3/4 of a human being. We don't need a constitution that says states like Vermont and Wyoming, with populations under 1 million people, should have the same number of senators as those in California and Texas. We don't need a constitution that permits an electoral college that allows candidates to win the popular vote and still lose the election, which has happened in 2 of our last 5 presidential elections. Our governmental system is unraveling, leading to extreme partisanship, spying by federal government agencies on its citizens by listening in on their phones and spying on the internet, a current system that has endemic corruption and massive inequality in our society, a system that seems incapable of fixing itself. Why? It's been almost 30 years since the last amendment was even passed. A system that has agencies like the IRS, NSA, and the judicial system being corrupted must be corrected. My esteemed opponents will say, but we have the longest continuous constitution in the world at 233 years. Indeed, it's like a very old car that is breaking down and is constantly trying to replace old parts. Eventually it breaks down and you will need a new car. After 233 years, it is time to replace the old Constitution with a new Constitution that will address the problems that our society so urgently needs to fix in order for our nation to be able to continue in these trying times. Thank you. And now I will pass it to Bob Moran, Dr. Moran.
Thank you, Dr. Davis, and I'm very pleased to be able to participate. The current United States Constitution is outdated. It might have been something great and quite relevant in the late 1700s, but we're in the year 2020, and the relevancy of it just no longer exists. And I think the key element was set forth by Dr. Davis. We're talking legitimacy. A government needs to be considered legitimate by the populace. If it's not considered legitimate, it will go out of business, to be quite frank. And let's look at, I've got 4 main issues that I would like to set forth that support the proposition that we need a new constitution. The first is, look at the expanded electorate that exists today. If we go back to the late 1700s, when the founding fathers, and I mean that fathers because there were no women involved in that one, that the founding fathers put together, the electorate was basically consisted of white, male, 21 years of age or older, and property owners. Even in the late 1700s, that was an elite group of people. Bottom line, it was a small slice of the overall population at that time. We have continually expanded based upon the fact Americans want to, the electorate in this country. That view of democracy back in 1700s, late 1700s, is far different than the view of democracy today. In order for the government to be legitimate, the people wish to have a government that is responsible and accountable, and that they believe that the people are driving the bus. Simply stated, the structure of the Constitution in how we do things doesn't work. We only elect directly members of the House and members of the Senate. Not the case with the executive branch, the president and vice president, and certainly not the case with the judiciary, which I'll come back to, which I think is probably the most undemocratic element that you see in terms of our institutions of government. This is the founding fathers, if they were to come back and take a look today, would probably be shocked. And because this is not the world that they anticipated with their Constitution, and that was when they built it, of course. And we've had two great events, and it shows the resiliency of Americans. Those two events would be the Civil War and the Great Depression. The Civil War forever changed the structure and operation, norms and values in this society. And the 14th Amendment has been critical, and that's reflective of that particular event. The Great Depression was likewise a very significant event, followed by the New Deal. And I would say that it changed the view, it was transformational. It changed the view of Americans as to the role to be played by state and local government and the role to be played by the national government. And even today, with the bickering that goes on, I think that privately, both Democrats and Republicans, and certainly the nonpartisans, would agree that it is legitimate for the federal government to do things to help Americans, which was something that was ushered in, that ideology, because of the Civil War. Thirdly, the federal judiciary is basically the most undemocratic institution you're going to see. They have a lifetime appointment. And under the original Constitution, it was going to be, and still is, the president nominates, who's not elected by the people directly. Back a difference then, in the old days, it was the Senate, and they were not elected by the people, appointed by state legislatures to confirm by majority vote that nomination. Today, at least the senators are directly elected. And once you're on the bench, you're there for life. You may have Alzheimer's and not know you're a judge, but you still are, okay? And if we think about it at a base level, it's very undemocratic. There is no review by the people whatsoever. Now, they've had to interpret the Constitution. I would say that it's fallen on their shoulders because that's the judicial branch's responsibility. However, trying to take an arcane document and try to retrofit it through judicial interpretation to make it fit today's day and age simply results in the judiciary becoming, in essence, a legislative body. And we can call it Yes?
Time is up.
Oh, doggone it. Okay, well, they're not good. How's that?
Okay. Moving to the other team for their opening statement. Dr. Reed.
He should unmute first. Hey, everybody, welcome, and thank you all for coming. I'm going to be speaking for our team. We put together our opening presentation, but I will be presenting it to save time. I'd like to begin by thanking the other side, the other team, Paul and Bob. They've taken on a very difficult argument here and have offered some provocative beginnings for us. I think that their concerns are righteous. I think that there are reasons to be concerned, but I think their solutions are misguided. We've got 4 different reasons we think you should all vote with us and say that while change is necessary, we should not scrap the Constitution. Number one, and nothing I heard from the opening changes my mind on this. Number one, while the US is currently facing once in a lifetime changes in multiple areas, none of those challenges was caused by the United States Constitution, and the United States Constitution has not stopped them from being solved. The reasons for those problems lie outside of the Constitution, and changing the Constitution would not necessarily fix those. It's akin to saying that since we have a once in a lifetime pandemic, that we should tear down the renowned medical tower and rebuild it. Well, that may get you some better treatment. It may get you some worse treatment, but that's not the issue. The building is not responsible for COVID. The Constitution itself, its structure is sound. The problems lie in other areas, and there are some changes that can be made without destroying the entire structure. Number two, most people do agree, though, that some change is needed, that there are some areas where the Constitution, its structure, is showing signs of age, but there is a method to do that, and it is called the amendment process. Yes, it's true we haven't had one in a while, but amendments have transformed the Constitution and the nation over the last 200 years. For example, if we look at the 14th Amendment, which Bob mentioned, I believe, students often will mention that when they speak about the Constitution, they'll say all men are created equal. We always have to say, no, that's not in the Constitution. But you know what they're really referring to? What they really mean is the 14th Amendment, that no state shall deny the equal protection of the laws. That is nation changing. And that was an amendment. The structure of the nation did not need to be changed. Hamilton discussed the amendment process in the Federalist Papers, as did Madison. And they considered this very carefully. And Hamilton says in Federalist 85, he said, you know what, the amendment process is actually a good thing because you can treat one issue at a time. Our opponents proposed to hold a convention in which 50, 100 issues would need to be addressed, some kind of consensus would need to emerge. What are the chances of that happening effectively? Wouldn't it be much better to take one issue at a time and you can focus in on it? Hamilton says you could focus in on it without compromise. Hey, this is the issue. This is what needs to be changed. Number three, our opponents proposed to scrap the Constitution. The only way to do that would be through a convention, and in their introduction, they mentioned that's what they want to do. They can offer no guarantee that the result of such a convention would offer a better result. Hamilton spoke about this when he was talking about the imperfection of the original document. Yes, it is imperfect. But he said, you know, I would never expect to see perfect work from imperfect man. How can perfection spring from such materials? Their constitutional convention, don't be fooled, their constitutional convention will not end up in a utopia. It will be another series of compromises that may be better, they may be worse in some cases as well. There's no guarantee that they would come out of this with something better. In addition, what they may generate from a constitutional convention is a republic-ending crisis and stalemate. There was much more consensus for a change to the Articles of Confederation than there is a consensus for a change to the Constitution now. Paul cited a lot of statistics, but they were red herrings in a lot of cases. He did not cite any statistic that said that people want to completely restructure the Constitution itself. As a matter of fact, the Constitution is one of the few things that both the left and the right can generally agree on. What we disagree on is the interpretation of it. But the document itself is not necessarily under widespread assault. And four, today we share a common threat with the framers.
All right, so I guess I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about what John was about to say. The point that he was about to make is that there are concerns that our current system may have problems. So for example, some people cite the rise of too much executive power and potential for arbitrary rule. But the Constitution has checks and balances so that those concerns can be assuaged. And one of the concerns that we have is that if you have a constitutional convention, it might turn into a runaway convention. There are a variety of legal scholars who point out that that's a potential outcome. So everyone from Anthony Scalia, who was previously a conservative Supreme Court justice, to Lawrence Tribe, one of the most famous liberal interpreters of the Constitution, have argued that a new constitution could be a threat to democracy in the United States. We actually can see this when you look at some recent examples in other countries where they've decided to scrap their constitution. In Hungary in 2011, in Turkey in 2017, in Venezuela in 1999, and in Peru in 1993, their constitutional changes led to increasing authoritarianism. It didn't restore faith in the system. So at the end of the debate, we basically have two questions that we think they will be unable to answer and will warrant a vote in our direction. The first question is this: did our opponents suggest any change at all that could not be managed just as well or better through the amendment process? If we can use amendments to solve some of the problems that they identify, then that's a much better way than completely scrapping the entire Constitution. So reform is better than a complete elimination and the potential downsides that may bring. The other question that we have that we also think would warrant a vote in our direction is what fundamental aspect of the current Constitution, separation of powers, federalism, natural rights, classical republicanism, is out of date and thus no longer appropriate. Those were the principles that the framers agreed on. And those principles are actually found in every modern constitution that's been written over the last 250 years. So if those principles should govern the United States, then those principles should be upheld with adherence to the current Constitution. And so that's sort of what John was about to say.
Your time is up. So.
Great.
And welcome back, Dr. Reed. And so thank you. That completes the opening statements, which now allows us to move to reactions. And Team Davis.
Joe will lead off on that.
Has Davis team has 6 minutes.
Okay, Joe.
Okay. First of all, the talk about amending, you realize that state legislatures representing less than 20% of the nation's population can block any amendment to the Constitution. Second, I think that those who fear a constitutional convention, they probably could have said the same thing in 1787. Remember, the Constitutional Convention was not supposed to write a new constitution. It was to revise the Articles of Confederation. Did chaos result then? No, it didn't. And I think people have too little faith in the people of the United States. We're not going to end republicanism. We're going to, maybe what we need to do is revise the Constitution, not throw it out, and do what the Constitutional Convention was supposed to do in the first place. Hamilton quoted Hamilton. Well, Mr. Jefferson felt that every 19 to 20 years, we ought to look at the Constitution, maybe a new Constitution, that he was wary of the power of the dead over the living. Thank you.
Okay, Bob.
You're on mute, Bob.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Thank you. To state that the amendment process works well, I think has got a glitch. It is possible for a minority in this country to hijack the amendment process. We saw that with prohibition, where they made a policy change, and that was an utter failure because it wasn't considered ultimately supported and legitimate by the people, so had to use the amendment process to undo it. So that's an example where you got a problem. Remember, the Equal Rights Amendment to guarantee equality for women did not pass. which is interesting in a country where women are the majority of the population, numerically. And second of all, if you want to see if you're going to have a runaway hog wild convention, if you have a constitutional convention, why don't we do what we kind of have taught in classes? The states are laboratories of democracy, and we look at states to be innovative. We look at states to do things, and then it can be replicated if it works well. A number of states have held constitutional conventions, have written new constitutions, and it has not been a chaos or anarchy situation. So the amendment process is slow. It can not be overly effective. It doesn't mean that we have to eliminate the principles of the U.S. Constitution, but they certainly need to be revised in literally every category. Thank you.
Dr. Davis, you have 3 minutes remaining?
No, we're good.
Okay. Then we move to Team Reed. You have 6 minutes. You're on mute, John.
Unmute. Don't hold my inability to unmute against my argument, folks, please. I beg you. That is operator error. You know, I mean, we are not in complete disagreement here. I mean, what the other side just acknowledged is that major changes need to be made. Where we disagree is that we need changes in every single area. And I would very much disagree with that idea. Now, about the amendment process, and Professor Dmitrovich tells us that 20% of the population can stop an amendment. The framers purposefully made the amendment process somewhat difficult, 3/4 of the states. But they wanted to do that to stop the passions of the people. Am I gone again?
No, you're there.
Oh, okay. They wanted to stop the passions of the people from blowing the nation to and fro. I submit to you that it is appropriate that we should not have any amendments to the federal Constitution that cannot pass a majority of folks in all regions of the country. If you were to change that amendment process, you could have one region of the country change the Constitution in a way that benefited them. It's a difficult process, but it forces all the areas to participate. Professor Morin talks about the Prohibition Amendment and the ERA as problems with the process. I don't see those as problems. Yet the Prohibition is a failure. There's no doubt about that. But that's really the only one you can name. The ERA did not pass. They could not get enough states to pass it. That's not the fault of the process. And we may disagree. We may personally believe that's a travesty, or we may not. But that's not a fault of the process. It just could not get enough popular support. And one more thing, I think I have enough time here. One more thing, the comment was made that the original convention went off fine. Different world. They held it in private. There was no press that could comment. There was no social media. That could not happen today. So you cannot really compare those two things. They are apples and oranges. A convention today would be a circus. And yes, state conventions have occurred. You cannot compare a state constitutional convention to a US constitutional convention. Many people in my classes don't know that we have a state government, right? I mean, sadly, we try to change that, but federalism is not well understood. So we cannot change those two things. I want to cede the rest of my time to either Brian or Kathy.
Sure, I'll say a couple of quick things. They point out that there's a lack of faith in the current system, and they have a poll from Axios and a poll from Pew. That's not a lack of faith in the system. That's a result of polarization. So the United States has become increasingly polarized. And as a result, when you ask a poll question about what do you think about the system, what happens is people say, I don't like the person who's in charge, and Democrats don't like the current president, and Republicans didn't like the previous president. That polarization is not going to change because you change the Constitution. A new Constitution is just going to have the same level of polarization and the same dissatisfaction. Just as importantly, that same level of polarization will prevent any changes in a constitutional convention. So some conservatives want a new constitutional convention because they want to have a balanced budget amendment. Some liberals want to overturn Citizens United. They're coming at the amendment process from completely different perspectives, and it's unlikely that you would actually have any consensus emerge out of a constitutional convention. The other thing that I would say is a lot of the problems they cite with modern representation can be easily addressed either through an amendment or through changes at the state level. They point out the problems with the Electoral College. The states can just go ahead and adopt the National Voter Interstate Compact, which requires the electors to the Electoral College to vote for the winner of the popular election. You don't even need an amendment, and then the popular vote would determine who the president is. They point out the problems with the Judiciary and the Senate. Those are minor amendment processes. We've already changed representation in the Senate once in the early 1900s. We can certainly do that again or add additional states to make it more democratic. We could allow for judges to be elected, although I will say that at the state level, judicial elections have proved problematic because people have no idea who they're voting for when they select judges. It's like pin the tail on the donkey, and that's not true representation, at least not in the sense that the framers were talking about. I'll cede the rest of my time to Kathy.
Fred, excuse me, I do have some time on my group.
Yes, no.
When she's done,
Yes.
I'll go Pat. Okay.
Thank you, Paul.
Sure.
So I want to first of all tell you that I come at this from a different and maybe a little more pragmatic than a theoretical view because I've been a lawyer for 30 years. So I've seen our judiciary in operation. And I will tell you that it's very important to have judiciary who are not elected on the federal level, so that there is a way that those folks can be neutral arbiters, not thinking about what group that they're looking at, but simply looking at what the Constitution says and making that application. That's very, very important. Also, my perspective is that our Constitution is a document that has timeless principles in it. And while there's some things that Paul has cited and others have cited that say, well, you know what, we don't have this anymore, there's a lot that we still do have, and those principles are still there. What my concern is, and why I don't think we should have a constitutional convention, is right now we have a highly politicized atmosphere. And that in coupling with that, with the fact that it's not going to be a private meeting the way it was with the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution initially. I think it's going to be a situation where things are going to be hamstrung, where we're going to get very little done, where groups, highly politicized groups, can come in and make choices for a new ratification process, where courts can be completely changed. And we have enough time, we have enough trouble in our government right now passing a law. If you look at what's happened with the federal government and even with our state government, even those things are hard to do. Can you imagine putting the whole Constitution on the block and saying, let's just fix it? I don't think that's going to happen. I think what would happen is things would get frozen, and we wouldn't have any, the system in the law with precedent would be severely undercut by having judges that weren't neutral arbiters. We rely on that. That's what lawyers live on, and what our legal system lives on when it comes to predictability for the average citizen going before the court. So
Time's up. I'm sorry.
Oh, all right, sorry. I'll shut up.
And we have no go back. We have no go backs, Dr. Davis. But you do have the opportunity now for cross-examination. Your team has 3 minutes to ask questions of Team Reed.
But Fred, I did have a couple of minutes left. I didn't use up all my time.
But it's in order, not in terms of time used. So you had your order time. Now we are on to cross-ex.
Curses.
I know.
Okay, Bob will start off.
Got a question for Dr. Reed's team, and it would be this. An item that seemed to be excluded from the conversation, and I would like you to respond to it. How can we deal with the quasi-legislative role that is now being played by the judiciary that certainly goes arguably over the line from interpretation to just flat legislating. You could take the Roe versus Wade case. I'm not particularly in favor or against it, but the fact is that's a pretty good example of legislating from the bench, and that's a fairly undemocratic way to do it on what's a major policy matter. So how do you rectify judicial lawmaking?
Oh, do we ask another question, Fred?
Yeah,
or-
the other side responds.
No.
So,
Okay.
That's for our team
yes.
to answer. I want to hear from Brian or Kathy on this one, because this is more in their wheelhouse. But I'm not sure I would necessarily agree that Roe versus Wade was legislating from the bench, or that any other of the cases are legislating from the bench. That has been a conservative criticism of the Supreme Court, that these are essentially decisions that are imposing liberal values on a conservative electorate. But that's just one point of view. That is not fact. I do not see it that way. All of those cases were ruled on using legitimate constitutional guarantees. For example, Roe versus Wade, the right to privacy. The government cannot go into the discussion between a woman and her doctor. Brian or Kathy, do you want to jump in?
Here's another example. We've had a case a lot more recently than that. It's Crawford v. Washington, and it deals with the ability to use hearsay testimony in order to convict someone of a domestic battery. And this case went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. The result of that case was basically that the court said that rolled back precedent, right? Looking at the law, it rolled back precedent and the line of cases that had extended. And Justice Scalia, what he did was he went back to the time of Sir Walter Raleigh and the idea that absolutely a person needs to be confronted with the person who is accusing him. So to me, Crawford v. Washington is an excellent kind of case to show that our system works, because it wasn't a matter of Scalia legislating anything. He applied the ultimate law that we have and came up with a great result, both for our judicial system and for every defendant.
Time. We now have an opportunity for Team Reed to ask a question of Team Davis.
All right, I will ask one. If a constitutional convention is called as you wish, what guarantees can you offer that the end result will be better than the current Constitution?
Joe, you want to respond to that, or Bob?
Joe, go ahead, please.
Oh,
You're on, Joe.
okay. What guarantee? I don't know. We're human beings. There are no guarantees. What guarantee was there that those guys that met in Philadelphia in 1787 would come up with something better than the Articles? Don't let perfection be the enemy of good. I don't think we can demand perfection. We can demand better. And again, maybe the question shouldn't be, should it be a new constitution? Should we revise? And the only way to do that, I think, is with a convention.
So given that standard that we shouldn't allow perfection to be the enemy of the good, your argument for a new constitutional convention is that the current constitution is not perfect. Doesn't that same answer apply to your argument?
No. I don't think so. If your game plan going into a football game isn't working as it should, well, what's the guarantee that a new game plan will be better? I don't know. I think that we should try, and it might be better, maybe to be worse, but we're dealing with humans, and should we demand perfection of everything? I don't know.
And I'll hitchhike in there and forward this. There are no guarantees of anything for tomorrow, but there is one thing that's a foundational element that needs to be satisfied. And that foundational element is that you need to have a government that is considered by the populace to be legitimate. And it is not considered in many realms to be legitimate anymore. The Constitution was fine at its time. These are different times. And yeah, there is no guarantee, but I have one last item of guarantee, and that is I have faith in the American public.
Okay, one more thing. I would imagine that we could completely flip-flop and Team Reed could make the arguments that Team Davis is making, and Team Davis could make the arguments that Team Reed is making.
And we are at time for the cross-examination, which allows us now to step to the final phase, which are the closing remarks from both teams. And the first to go, it's 6 minutes for each, is Team Reed. You're on mute.
Actually, I think I go last, Fred.
Yep, in a debate, the affirmative gets the first and the last slots.
Really? I thought that was the opposite. I think John is correct.
I checked the rules.
Oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me. I've got the winning argument. I don't care when I go. So I'm feeling pretty good right now. And this cockiness is probably not helping my case with the voters, but all right. So unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to share this slide with you at the beginning, but I was going to show you this at the beginning, and I was going to tell you I was going to ask the audience this at the end. But this is what I will ask you to consider now that we've heard all the arguments. Did our opponents suggest any change at all, that could not be managed just as well or better through the amendment process? If the answer is no, we have the winning argument. And what fundamental aspect of the current Constitution, separation of powers, did they say that they don't agree with that? Federalism, do they not like that? Natural rights theory, do they want to get rid of that? Classical republicanism, which is sovereignty of the people, we the people, do they want to get rid of that? Have they shown that any of those fundamental principles are out of date and no longer appropriate? Or do they just want to apply those in some kind of exercise in a convention? If your answer is that they have not challenged the validity of those foundational concepts, then we must have the winning argument. I'll cede the rest of my time for final comment to Brian and or Kathy.
Kathy, do you want to go, or would you like
sure.
me to?
Sure. No, go ahead, Brian, and then I'll finish up.
So just to sort of build a little on what John was talking about, we agree that there are some problems with the Constitution, but as our esteemed colleagues pointed out, we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. There are changes that we can make at the margins that can address their concerns. So as I previously pointed out, we could go ahead and have a national interstate voter compact to address the issue of the Electoral College. We could change the basis of representation in the Senate. The one argument that I also want to remind you has to do with the lack of faith in the system. Professor Morin made a really passionate point that a lot of Americans don't trust the system. Our answer is it's not that they don't trust the system, it's they don't trust the person who's currently in charge of the system. And so those surveys can't be the basis to scrap the entire Constitution. That polarization will remain even in a new system of government, and the poll surveys will reveal similar results. If you remember from John's opening statement, other countries have tried to come up with new constitutions to address what they have felt were problems with the political system. And the results, to be frank, have not been pretty. I'll go ahead and let Kathy finish up for us.
The last thing I guess I'd like to address and to kind of underscore what John said was there really hasn't been a change in philosophy. I think we have the philosophical argument in the Constitution of what we want to stand for. And in order to make that happen, I think there are other ways that we can do it. And I know we've enumerated those ad nauseum in this presentation. My concern is that we're talking, people in this convention wouldn't be talking about the structure, the kinds of things that Dr. Reed was talking about. They're talking about a list of agenda politicized items. And I think that all of those things could be dealt with within an amendment. And I think it's not a matter, I think our group has the ultimate faith in the Constitution. That's why Professor Reed and Professor Fletcher and I are defending it. Because I can tell you as a lawyer, I see it operate every day. Every time I stand up as a defense lawyer and I'm talking about the confrontation clause, I'm talking about due process. I'm watching a document that we've had for all of these years work personally in somebody's life today. And so that's why I would urge you, if we're going to try to change things, let's do it by an amendment. Let's not scrap this great document.
Thank you, Team Reed. And Team Davis, you have the final word. You have 6 minutes.
All right. Everywhere our society is on fire and college professors are taking notes, I'm sure Team Reed can relate to that. But Professor Fletcher and Professor Reed, both, they talk about reform, but they both admit pretty much that reform is destroyed because of partisanship today. Where are you going to get reform? A nation may only survive if the people have legitimacy in their government and their institutions. When there is a lack of faith, trust, and confidence in their government, it then becomes a simple matter of time before it will be changed and replaced. The famous Gallup poll has been polling the public since the beginning of the 1950s about their confidence in American institutions. In the 1950s, the general overall confidence level was extremely high, and most were in the low to high 90s for our confidence in our institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, please look at the latest ratings according to the Gallup poll for confidence in our institutions. The presidency, 38% confident level. Supreme Court, 38%. The medical system, 36%. The banks, 30%. The public schools, 29%. Our criminal justice system, 24%. Television news, 18%. And our beloved Congress, 11%. The only one with a major high rating with 73% is the military. These are historical lows. It does not take a genius to see where this is heading. It will lead to an eventual disintegration and destruction of our Constitution and our government. It will lead to either another demagogue taking over the presidency and finishing the job, or a call for the only institution that has a positive rating of almost 75% of the population, which is the military, to take over the government, to put down insurrection. Either way, the result is the same. The only way to stop this is to call for a new constitutional convention to change and reform our Constitution to keep our republic from crumbling in the near future. That is already happening now. The time is now, and the choice is yours. Bob, I move it to you. Bob, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Oh boy, I forget about the little red sign. One item, and then I'll toss it to Joe. And that one item is, I go back to I originally said at the beginning, and that was that the founding fathers were elites. They were social, economic, and political elites. They built an elite structure and system, which is fine and dandy if you're talking the late 1700s. However, one of the basic structural problems that underlies the entire U.S. Constitution, hence it needs to be completely overhauled, is that we're not an elite society anymore, but we still have an elitist form of government running the show. Hence the lack of legitimacy in the eyes of the American public. Joe.
Okay. First, I don't see the neutral arbitration that we've heard from the judicial system from the time of Justice Marshall to Justice Taney and Dred Scott to Justice Warren to today. The Supreme Court has never been neutral. It reflects the political opinions of the majority of the judges. I think maybe we get to where we rely too much on the printed word. I have faith in the American people more than in the printed word of the Constitution. An example is freedom of speech. I think we get lazy and rely on the printed word to protect our freedoms. That maybe we need to tell ourselves and our fellow citizens that there's something that we should cherish and that we need to protect it, not the Constitution. It's important how it's important to all of us. Maybe, again, a new constitutional convention would end up not changing very much, but amendments are so hard to get. We complain about the Electoral College, but have we changed it? We complain about other things. Have we changed it? Maybe a constitutional convention would, as Mr. Jefferson said, every 19 to 20 years, but maybe it would prevent what he also said was good every now and then. Jefferson said a little revolution's good now and then. Maybe a constitutional convention would prevent that. The Constitution is not trash. It's a great document, but maybe it's time to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much. That concludes the exchange. We do actually have a question from Brandon. I wanted to read that to the panel and have you respond to it. How can we convince the younger generation to support any type of government? The current competence level is very low.
That's a difficult one. That is a difficult one. For the purposes of this debate, I would submit that confidence, as Brian has said eloquently before, the confidence is with the people in the offices for the most part. I don't think, and we don't have any statistics or any surveys that show us that that there is a lack of confidence in the basic fundamental principles, separation of powers, classical republicanism, natural rights theory. What I hear from my students is that natural rights are not being protected enough. That's what I'm hearing. They're being encroached upon. I'm not hearing them say, let's get rid of natural rights. I'm not hearing them say, let's get rid of some fundamental principles of republicanism, for example. Now, one thing we can do, actually several reforms can be made that Brian mentioned earlier that could greatly increase younger people's confidence in the system. And they don't have to do with the Constitution. The Constitution is mostly silent on voting. So it does not, it leaves it to the states, and numerous reforms, ranked order voting, taking away kind of winner takes all, numerous changes that Brian elucidated earlier could greatly enhance confidence in the process. And they do not require even any change to the federal Constitution.
I'd like to make a comment here too, and that is you have to include young people in the process. Young people are showing their total disdain, as usual, towards the system by not voting, by not getting involved. You make a constitutional convention to make sure that certain amount of young people will be represented. I mean, what we're having now, the institutions are failing us. And we're not surprised when there's corruption. Is anybody surprised when politicians are being found guilty of corruption? No, we now expect this. So fundamental changes have to be made.
Yes, Brandon, maybe one way would be for the parties to stop nominating old white men to lead the country. And maybe we need to turn to younger people to look for younger examples for the young people. And maybe the young people need to make themselves heard. Instead of complaining, make yourself heard. You have a voice. There are a lot of you. Don't just say no one's listening.
Excellent. And I've shared the poll, the sort of post-forum poll. If you have not taken it yet, please complete that so we can announce the results. We have one other question. If the Constitution is scrapped, what kind of government would we have moving forward? What changes would occur? And we have like 3 minutes left, so keep the answer for you.
That question's for
So-
Paul's team.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's all good. Bob, do you want to make that? Probably more than likely, I'll just make a quick comment, is that we'll look and we'll see what issues there are that is hurting our government today in the various branches. And they talk about reform. We will make reforms. We'll make changes that'll try to make it better instead of just continually doing the same old. And now we have riots and problems and well, I'll defer to Bob.
I think that there's no guarantee as to what would come out. I mean, I think everybody has to agree to that point. However, the idea, as our opponents seem to suggest, that we throw the whole thing out and we're going to scrap the basic principles such as federalism, natural rights, and such. Well, that's not necessarily, not even logically the case. There are elements that the American public would support and does support. If there's a provision in the Constitution that works, we can keep it. There's nothing that says you have to get rid of it all. It's like a buffet line, which sadly don't exist too much anymore, but it's like a buffet line where you can go down and you can pick what you think is good and what isn't. So this would be a way of evaluating the entire process and keeping the good and putting in stuff that's even better.
Yes,
So-
I would do away with the undemocratic way the Senate is apportioned. I would do away with the Electoral College. I would put a federal guarantee of the right to vote. We were told in Gore versus the US that there is no federal guarantee of the right to vote. Again, I agree that we would keep the basic form, but make it better.
All the things that Bob and Joe just mentioned could be done with amendments and more and better.
Yeah, I think that's the basic point that our team has tried to elucidate. The brilliance of the founders is that the principles they put into the Constitution, separation of powers, federalism, natural rights, republicanism, they would be part of any new Constitution. So the changes that they suggest are needed are marginal ones. And what they have to do with this, how do you implement issues like republicanism or federalism? And those are things that can be done through either an amendment process or just having the states step up.
There hasn't been an amendment in almost 30 years because of partisanship. What are you talking about amendments? There's not going to be any future amendments.
It's certainly possible you could have an amendment. You just had a bunch of states sign on to the ERA. I know the amendment itself is dead, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't restart the process.
Oh, it's delusional. Not going to happen with partisanship.
The problems you isolate with partisanship, they prevent a constitutional convention from being successful. So if you say that we're too partisan to implement the current provisions in the Constitution, that same level of partisanship prevents any changes from happening. So as John brilliantly pointed out in his opening, the framework, if it's got problems, a polarized society isn't going to be able to overcome those problems. You'll just have a gridlock.
I have a question for both teams to answer so I can get a broader perspective. I actually agree that we should reform the Constitution. However, I'm looking at it through my perspective, being a woman and also a person of minority. And in America, that's kind of the majority right now. As was mentioned before, women are the majority, and America is mostly populated of brown people. So I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong or provide more insight, shouldn't we rewrite or reform the Constitution by people that are often seen in America in a day and age, in the 21st century, which is mostly women and people of other ethnicities?
This is Bob. I'll weigh in on that. In a nutshell, you've just described critical legal studies analysis. in terms of of structural issues that in essence have the effect of maintaining the existing white male structure in the United States to the exclusion of others. Critical legal studies, I think, probably ties in perfectly with what you're talking about.
I'm not familiar with critical legal studies, so I can't comment on that. But I think you hit on something very important, is that's obviously one of the crises that well, it's a long-standing issue, and it's come to a head as it will come to a head many other times. I don't see that the Constitution itself, despite the people who wrote it, I don't see structural racism embedded within it. And if you do see that, please point it out to me, but I don't see it. Now, somebody early on in the debate mentioned the 3/5 clause and the slavery clauses, but those were overturned by amendments. So yes, they were. It was a pro-slavery document, but those have been removed. Those have been overturned. So I don't think those are a factor. We do need to deal with structural racism, obviously, and we need and structural sexism as well, which isn't being mentioned as much as it should be as well. But I don't see the Constitution as the barrier to that. I think that there are certain voting changes that we discussed, different ways votes can be, and that's not in the Constitution. That's up to the states. Ranked choice voting, getting rid of gerrymandering. You could even change the way that the Senate is elected if you wish. Although I'm not sure that's as big an impediment as people say. Same thing with the Electoral College. I don't think that's as big as people say, but you could change those things that would deal with that.
We are at time. I did want to share again the results from the pre-discussion poll, where we had basically 56% not wanting to scrap the Constitution, 32% wanting to. We have the results of the more recent poll. Just trying to stop sharing that. And let's see if we can pull those results up.
We changed no minds.
Well, we always hope that we do. Okay, yeah, just trying to pull up the second results here. And but basically, the results are that it is now 67% that don't want to change the Constitution, and 35% that do want to change. That's the big change. I just have lost my results. But I thank you for participating.
Could you repeat that? Could you repeat the results?
Yeah, 35% are now interested in changing the Constitution, and 65% keeping it. So I wanted to thank everybody today for your participation. First, the panel, and we can do a virtual applause for you for a fantastic job. I did want to do a shout out that Vice President Merkelo had joined us for the entire event. Truly appreciate your support in doing so. And it was a lively discussion. Just like everything else in American politics, we're pretty set in our ways and views. But I think the discussion demonstrates why the notion of thinking about our Constitution at least once a year is a very grand idea. I thank you for the many students that did participate today. And with that, a grand thank you to all, and enjoy your Wednesday afternoon.